It is my pleasure to welcome to the Completed Life Initiative Fall Conference, Asunción Álvarez. She has a master's in clinical psychology and a PhD in bioethics from the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico. She is a professor and researcher in psychiatry and mental health department in the Faculty of Medicine at UNAM. Her academic and professional focus is in death in the medical practice and end-of-life decisions. She is co-author of articles and books on the subject and currently president of the World Federation of Right to Die Societies, as well as president of the Academy of Bioethics in Mexico. We are delighted to have you with us and a part of our fall conference. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Mark. I'm very happy to be here and honored for the invitation.
Great. Well, thank you. And we appreciate your time and joining our conference. The Completed Life Initiative, when we think of our work and our mission, well, we try to help people to define and to experience a meaningful life, a completed life, as well as a good death. I'm wondering for our audience, if we might begin with, if you might share a moment in your life that really had meaning for you, a moment in your life where it truly felt meaningful.
I have to say two, because those two moments, I think, were, well, among others maybe, but were when I met my daughters. Each one of them, when they were born, as they are 3 years apart, and they were really the best moments, I think.
Oh, wonderful. What are their names?
Elena and Adriana.
Wonderful.
They are now 37 and 34. They're very good friends now.
Lovely. When we think of meaningful moments in our life, we often think of the birth of a child or a significant moment where we experience beauty or something happens. Often a meaningful moment in our life can be when we lose someone, when we experience death. Is there such an experience that you might have had in your own life where you experienced a death in your own?
Surely,
Yeah.
of course, it's my father's death. All my life I was very afraid of my father's death because he seems to be so afraid of death. And it was like, I wish he couldn't have to go through that. And then when he died, he was sick. He had an aortic stenosis, like how do you say, the aorta is very, very, very narrow. And he was in the hospital. And he had received terminal sedation because the doctor told us there is coming an infarct. He will have that. That's unavoidable. So it was a good decision. And then we were waiting, my siblings and my mother, and the doctor came and very clearly, but very warmly said, my father's name was Miguel. Miguel has just died. And I said, was that the moment I was so afraid of? It was so good. It was gentle, so gentle. And I was so grateful of that experience and asking why I was so afraid of that. Thanks to a good physician, of course. And my father was lucky. He didn't suffer. He didn't suffer through the end of, through the last stage of his life. And he didn't suffer at the end. So that was a very important moment.
And did your attitude towards death change then after that experience? Did your fear of death change after the death of your father, or your attitude towards death?
No, because I think it was that fear I perceived in my father that didn't help me.
Mm.
One of the reasons which I had to do something with death, and I worked on that subject, and I had to do something. So I had already started before that. And I was prepared in general, for instance, to take the decisions related to his end of life. But I was still afraid of his death. I still remember how much I had feared his death because he had to go through that. So for this reason, it was so significant. But in a way, my father had already influenced me to work on death, on the subject of death.
Is there any advice you could share with people who are watching about how to prepare for a death? Is there anything that you've learned through your studies or your experience that you might
Yes.
advice you could give us on how to prepare for such a moment?
We have to think about that moment in our lives. We have to think, to really think, have a conversation before with us. What would we like? What would not like at the end of life? And share that and make conversations. I think you say that all the time. And I'm really convinced about that, about talking about that seems very difficult because it seems there is never a space to do that, to have that conversation. But once you begin, you realize that the other person is in the same situation. It's also afraid of death. And when you can share that and talk about what really you are afraid of, you can find solutions. Because if you're afraid of dying alone, well, make sure you're not going to die alone. If you're afraid of dying in pain, make sure you're not going to die in pain. If you don't have an answer to, that was my experience, to live a life that has to end, look for an answer. Look for your own personal answer. How are you going to manage to live a life that includes death? What would give meaning to that life? And it's very personal. For the people who share a religion, maybe it's easier, but for people who don't share a religion, find your own answer because that will give you peace. That's my advice.
That's really helpful. And I like the idea of creating space for that conversation. And I think that's difficult for many people to create that space because they're afraid of it or they don't know what language to use. They're not quite sure what questions to ask.
Yes.
And I think that's really helpful to encourage all of us to find that space through reading a book or finding resources online or
Yes.
a
A
good friend.
feeling and have a conversation. Yes. And teach children to make it easy because we were taught to not talk about it. Nobody told us don't talk about it, but you simply notice that nobody talked about it, and you learn it better when you see the example. So teach them that it's a natural conversation. Maybe it can be sad, of course, in some situations if it's happening a death, but more reason to talk about that and help with the grieving. So yes, we have many opportunities in life to start a conversation because that is happening all the time.
Yeah, thank you. I was interested in your work as a bioethicist. Could you share how you came to be interested in the field of bioethics and how that's
Yes,
been a part of your life journey?
it started before I thought about the concept of bioethics. When I had the chance, very lucky chance, to enter to the university where I'm still in, to do a project in which I could change my personal questions, how can I live knowing that I'm going to die, to academic question, thanks to the help of a very a professor, a scientific, a researcher, a pathologist that sympathized with my interest. So I make that personal question into academic question, that how are patients experiencing facing death? I could do that, but my first question was an ethical question. How can I justify that I'm going to ask patients how they feel so I can have answers to my personal question? And I realized that they couldn't talk with anybody about what they were experiences. So the research could be a kind of exchange. I would be like an ear for them if they wanted to talk, and they would help me with answers. And then I realized it was not only a personal question. I realized that was a social problem, the denial of death. So it was like my first approach to an ethical question in research. I did that research. I was in the university, in the Faculty of Medicine. I knew if I wanted to talk and be listened by physicians, I had to grow in my curriculum. So that's what I decided. I have to do a master. And then when I finished with this research, I wanted to do a doctorate. And in that moment, the Faculty of Medicine in UNAM opened a doctorate in bioethics. And I said, just what I needed. And I entered bioethics, and is how I fully entered to bioethics.
Help our viewers to understand when we think of bioethics, what are the questions that you wrestle with, for example?
How do we act in each subject? What is the ethical, the good way to act? What is good and what is not good? But finding arguments that can be shared by everybody, so not religious argument. And that's what the Colegio of Bioethics was founded in Mexico, because we had a lot of confessional groups studying bioethics, but they were restricted to a perspective in life. So I think what we do is this good, is this bad, for instance, and this is especially facing new possibilities thanks to the advances of science, of course, genetics, cloning, now artificial intelligence, that we were not prepared, but because that didn't happen. So now we have to think, can we use this? How can we use this? Why not? Or among what limits? But also old problems, like euthanasia, because it's an old problem, but maybe with the perspective that brings us now science, the advance of science. So that's what I would say, very simple about bioethics. Find what is good and what is not good.
And what are the big questions with bioethics as they relate to, we were talking about the space of discussing death. So where does a bioethicist like you, when you think about death, the denial of death, the conversation of death, where do those overlap, those two subjects?
Bioethics and death.
Yeah.
I think one issue is all the rights of the patients are denied many times, because physicians, who are the ones who know when death is going to occur and have the power, a good power, because they can cure, they can treat, and patients need the doctor, they are not prepared to share what they know, to communicate to the patients what it's about their own life and death. So many times patients don't know what is really happening. So they can not have the freedom to choose what they want in the last stage of their lives. That's a big issue. This is medical ethics. It is simple medical ethics. There are more, like now that we can prolong life, where is the limit in that? And that's again, if patients were very well informed, they could participate more instead of that the physician thinks is their right and is their obligation and they are the ones who know when to stop that. So that's a huge problem. And all of that has to do with the denial of death and the lack of education for that. But then, of course, no, yes, go on.
No, go on, please. Yes.
No, I would say then you think about deciding your own life, euthanasia or medical aid in dying, and that's a very controversial issue. Always, it's like one of the typical problems of subjects of bioethics.
You speak and teach in a certain context, in a certain country. For those of us from around the world, because we'll have people joining us from every continent, and the Completed Life Initiative is based in New York City, but could you explain to our viewers how this works in Mexico? How the relationship between the physician and the patient, are there cultural aspects that are challenging? Are there stereotypes that are challenging? How does that play out in the hospital or wherever someone might be in the end of their life?
We are supposed to be a country that is very familiar to death and loves at death and can relate to death, but that is true for some groups that keep their traditions that have conserved for centuries, and they do know how to prepare to death, how to be together, and how to make a brief. But for the majority of the Mexicans, the more urban we are, the more occidental we are, the denial of death prevails, and especially in the medical practice. You see the academic curriculum of medical students, and they never receive preparation to face death. Well, almost never. I give a class, an optional class. How do you say optional?
Elective?
Elective class.
Yeah.
That is named A Physician Facing Death. And it works very well, but it's just few students do that. And so they are not prepared. They know why people die, but the illness, how it evolves and leads to death, but this thing not attached at the fact that a person is going to experience that, and they will have to talk to them. So they are taught, on the contrary, to prolong life, to fight against life, to distance from the patient, so they are not, they can keep themselves like prepared to do their work, but emotionally distanced. So they have to teach another thing, to be more prepared to that. So we find many patients that are not informed, that are receiving treatments that are not useful, or are sent to the homes if there are not enough resources in the institution, to the homes. That's all we can do. Bye-bye. So there is a change, little by little. Palliative care is growing little by little, and some physicians are good to inform and do differently, but in general, we are not prepared.
Right. Speaking of culture and acceptance of death or not, we'll broadcast this episode around Dia de Los Muertos. Can you explain what that day means to you and to countries that follow it, for those who may be unfamiliar
Yes, it's one of the great festivities in our country, and I think in other countries like Bolivia, Peru, and we really, it's beautiful festivity because it's full of colorful flowers and altars of death, and now we have the parade, but this has been since the James Bond film, so it's turning a little like losing the.
Did you say the James Bond film?
No, I saw when they were filming that in the center of the city, in downtown city, but I have not seen it. I have to
Oh,
see that
okay.
because.
But that's what you
Oh,
meant, right?
yes, after that we have this parade that it was not something that we used to have, but we do have many cultural manifestations, and then again, the Mexicans, there are the really groups that have been doing this for centuries, and it's a great honor to receive the dead people and prepare them the food, and they they really feel they are coming and take the essence of the food, and they are with them, and we are used to that. The others that we do not that so fully, but we like that, we are used to that, and the Death of the Dead has been with us since we were children. We were used to eat a candy skull with our name, and that was funny. And we eat a delicious bread that has bones on it, and that's delicious. So we are used to that in these days. The rest of the year, we don't want to know about death in general. So there is this division. But we learn some things about these festivities. For instance, the altar of the dead is something that is more people do, and children mm, begin to see, like, you put the picture of the people dead, of the grandfather, of the and and children more naturally can ask you, and when are you going to be there? You say, oh, okay, yes, someday, of course. So there is something that influences us well, but not enough.
Right, that's very powerful. And in our culture, we hand out candy on Halloween, which is the day before All Hallows Eve, but we don't have a candy skull with our name on it, though. Where did that tradition start from? Or the bread with bones kind of things? Where does that go back very far, or do you think that is a recent development?
It is very complex because, in a way, the celebration of the death comes from the Catholic celebration of the death. But
Mm-hmm.
then it was syncretized with the costumes of the ancient Mexicans. So
Right.
everything is a combination of that. Maybe Spanish people, Catholic people that brought that to Mexico didn't eat the skull, but in Mexico it was, we were more used to people were more used to the skull. So I don't know in what moment really, but when I was a child, it was for sure. I want mine, and we have mine, and it was delicious, and it was like a present to have that candy.
Oh. I'm impressed with how, bioethics tries to raise the difficult questions. In particular, what the Completed Life Initiative tries to do is to help um, patients advocate for their choices, their
Mhm.
right to direct their own care at the end of life. And I know you've done some writing and thinking on this. For example, euthanasia, medical aid in dying. What are your thoughts on that, and what has your work led you to think about in regards to that option for end of life choices in care?
I've been very committed to this issue because when I did my doctorate, my research was on euthanasia. I had already like a kind of position in favor of that, but I really didn't know much about that. And I knew that through my research, I had to understand what the history, what does that really mean? How is the position of the Catholic Church, of the palliative care, and the experience in the Netherlands, and the arguments in favor and against. So I enjoyed very much that research that I was learning so much of. And when I was writing my thesis, I was thinking in a way in the form of a book because I wanted to share everything I was learning with the public. When I finished, I said, okay, it was about 2004. I finished my thesis. And I said, okay, enough of death. That's what I thought. I could never leave the subject. I was so committed. I had connections to receive news, new articles, friends. Everybody would send me, oh, you might be interested in that and that and that. And I really was very interested. And I have been interested and committed to that since then. Then I was very convinced that it is right to have the choice to decide when to die. And it's another answer to what I was looking for. You can't avoid death, but you can choose not only how to live, but also how to die. And everybody should have, if they want to, have that right. So that's how I have been involved in this subject.
How does it work in Mexico? And I know you've done writing on Colombia, for example. What are the procedures, the process involved in someone who decides, I would like to choose that option? How does it work in Mexico or other countries that you might want to help our audience understand?
Well, in Mexico, it is forbidden. We currently we have had many bills that have not gone through. But now, currently, we have one that is supported by political parties with the strength, so it may pass. It's not perfect. It has many things that most should be better, but I think it would be very good if it passed. And if not, it is very good that we are talking about that. So let's see what happens. We have another group.
Could
Yes?
you describe what the process is that's what the proposal is? How would that look or work?
It would include, besides palliative care and the control of pain, it will include what they call a dignified death through euthanasia. So they say Mexicans should not only have right to palliative care, but also to choose and receive the help to have a good death when they decide. That is very good. Mm-hmm.
And can you describe other countries and their different approaches that you are aware of as your work as president of the World Federation of Right to Die Societies? I know you've written on Colombia and other countries.
Yes, Colombia has had a great progress in this subject thanks to a very progressive Supreme Court. Judges that are really looking at basing their sentences or their resolutions on the right to dignity, to solidarity, to autonomy. So that's how they, since 1997, decriminalized euthanasia. Why they haven't had is a law by the Congress, because again, Colombia is a mixed of in the population. very liberal and very conservative, liberal and again, the Catholic Church trying to stop the progress. But now they have a very good bill and it has advanced through the Congress. So this bill that is very complete, very well written, very well argumented, has many chances to be legalized. Anyway, what is distinctive in Colombia, but also in Spain, is that both of them, because Colombia has no law, but the Supreme Court asked the Ministry of Health to make a regulation so it could be worked. It's not the best is a law, but meanwhile they have regulations by the Minister of Health. And they have this thing that it's a committee who evaluate if the patient who asks for euthanasia can receive that help. And it's interesting. I always thought that it was not a good idea because as in all the rest of the countries, and I know much better what happens in the Netherlands. I have studied that, talked with a lot of physicians, and I thought that it worked very well that it was the physician who decide because they had the conversation with the patients and really understand and has to be convinced by the patient that his suffering is unbearable. And that's what were needed, a good relation to discuss that. And then another physician to confirm that. So I thought at first that it was not a good idea, a committee doing that. But I asked Colombian people and they told me, no, it's good because it's not the weight on the physician. It's a committee who do that. So it works for them. The committee is a small committee. It's only a physician that has a specialty in the illness of the patient, a lawyer, and a psychiatrist or psychologist to decide if the person really has the capacity to take the decision. So it works.
And these are what we might think of like a review board.
Yes, but before
Yeah,
euthanasia,
exactly.
different from other countries, that is after euthanasia is practiced, like in the Netherlands, the committee review after that to see if all the requirements, legal requirements, were complied.
So
here it's different.
So if I have that clear in my mind, help me to understand in our audience. In Colombia, is the review board, it approves or denies a request?
Yes, yes. You must know this group, the SCLAV. The SCLAV has been very active, studying, analyzing, and proposing solutions to all what they see as an obstacle for people in Colombia to have that right. So now they are informing if the committee don't approve, people have another chance. They can ask for another committee. So they are finding many solutions to people and informing because people is not well informed.
Right.
Anyway, that takes time, of course, and the patient has to wait, and that's a problem anyway.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Are there examples of how someone might be denied if they petitioned and this was their choice, or are you aware of what might lead to
Something
that
that
result?
happens all the time was what happened with this woman that Marta Sepúlveda was the second woman that could have the help to die through euthanasia, even she was not terminal. Terminal condition was something that the Ministry of Health regulated. But there was a sentence by the Supreme Court that said, no more need to be terminal. So this woman first once she had been accepted to have euthanasia, the day before, some days before she was informed, no more, you are not approved. But then she was approved because the lawyers acted in her favor. Well, that happens a lot. They still are physicians that are saying you are not terminal. But that's not an impediment to have because of the Supreme Court decision. But that's an example because there are many physicians against euthanasia or afraid of doing that, at least in the public institutions. There are many physicians that privately do not follow anything, and they are helping people who can pay. We don't know about that.
Thank you for that answer. I think that's helps give context to what's happening in Colombia. One of the things I found helpful and maybe a little provocative is the word euthanasia to many listeners has an immediate emotional reaction.
Yeah.
It's sometimes helpful to know that word comes from two Greek words that mean a good death, as you know. Could you help us understand the history of that word or what it means to you or where it came from? It's been politicized in many ways. It's a word that carries baggage with it, if you will, but the origins of it is perhaps a little cleaner. Could you maybe walk us through some of that?
Originally, euthanasia meant only that, a good death. And it could be a good death by not doing things, but being with the person, and by helping being there, by helping to die also, but it means a lot of things. And then I think since the 19th century, it began to mean only the help that physicians give to people to die well. And that was going well, very well, till the Second World War, where the Nazi people used the word euthanasia to name what they were doing, that was killing people that didn't ask for death. And that was a great regression in the progress that has been done, because there were already associations defending euthanasia, and even in the Catholic Church had been important people defending euthanasia. But I think that was what made so much harm to the word, that has began to have a double meaning, you can say. The original meaning of a good death by helping to die, and the harm that was done to the word when it was used so wrongly. So I think, for instance, in Germany, you can say the word, or you can think of having that option now, but in the Netherlands, they like the word. It's a good death. In Belgium, they like the word. It's a good death. And in Mexico, there is no so big problem, but the problem in Mexico, we use euthanasia without problem, but many people don't understand well that it's always the decision of the person. Many people think that you can decide that all people is suffering, he must die. And they call that also euthanasia. So we have to educate a lot about that. But there is no so much problem with the word, like meaning something horrible. No.
Yeah. And I think for many people, the word euthanasia or medical aid in dying or choosing that path is a means for them to express their autonomy, their right to choose, rather than someone else. And they feel drawn to this option because they think of it as no one should be able to tell me how I should die.
Of course.
Does that ring true with your experience as well?
Completely. And also to have the peace of mind that as we are going to die, we can avoid that. we can be in peace, that could be in the best way possible. Maybe we have good palliative care and we are okay and we want to live more because we can enjoy still things of life. But we also know that if things go really bad, you can choose to have the exit in peace with the people you want without suffering. And that's a relief in life. That will be okay. So I don't have to bother about that because I can be confident that I can choose always.
Yeah. The Completed Life Initiative, one of our things that we work towards is to help people to ask the question, what is a completed life?
Mm-hmm.
Once you recognize, in fact, there will come a time where I will no longer live, I will have died. Are there things that I want to do before my life is complete? Are there parts of my emotional life, my family life, my interests? I don't want to leave something unfinished, including planning for my death. Um, what are your thoughts as a bioethicist, as a mother, as someone who travels wildly? What does a completed life look like in your mind, in your experience? What does it look like to have lived fully?
Well, in a way, really, after thinking so much of death, fearing death so much, and making a work on that, I think we have to live in a way, feeling like our life is complete, that we can die, and 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 don't not letting things for the next day. For instance, my daughters have listened a lot about this, and uh, one of my daughters that when we get like we have a bad moment and went out of the house would come back and say, I don't want to live this way because we never know. So I love you. So in a way we can die any moment. So don't leave things to another day. People should know what you care about them, and you has done what you want to do. But in another way, I do think that it can arrive a moment in which you say, I can die now, and I can do things to die now. Because not only because my life is complete, because I think maybe you can always find something else to do, but mainly because you can lose the control of your life. Now you have the control, but at a certain age, well, it's always the same at any age, but maybe more probably at certain age, things can happen to you that you can lose the capacity to decide, to move, and you end depending on others completely. And maybe when you think that that is more probably, maybe you can say, this has been good, and I prefer to end here, like a good book, like this is a good life. Okay, so it's in those two senses that I think complete life.
I love that image of a book, and we know all the good books end just at the right time with the right page. One of our recent speakers talked about being the author of your own life.
Sure.
You have that power. And so she wanted, for example, to have the opportunity to write her last chapter, and to write the final page. And she wanted that privilege and that opportunity. So I think that's a lovely image of what it looks like to live a completed life. So
Mm-hmm.
well, thank you for your time. Thankful for delightful conversation today. Is really helpful. I know for our audience and for myself, and grateful that you're a part of our fall conference this year. So thank you.
I thank you. I enjoy very much the conversation, and I'm very happy that I can be part of what you do that I admire. And I think it's very, very important.
Thank you.